Hey everyone, Lynn Marie here. Welcome to the next episode of Quit Happens. Today's guest is Dr. Alessandra Wall. Alessandra is a psychologist, a professional speaker, and a coach. And I found her through a connection that we'll talk about when we get into this interview. But she is part of my new segment of people who, yes, they have a quit, but they are also experts in helping other people who are quitting, and they have additional insight from their backgrounds. Like I said, she's a psychologist, so that she can help you even further with some things that maybe she didn't encounter in her own quit, but that she's encountered in maybe her coaching clients or her patients through her practice, patterns that she's seen so that she can help you work through them. Now, before we get to Alessandra, if you happen to be feeling stuck in some area of your life and maybe contemplating a quit or want to learn more about strategic quitting, you can pick up my book, Quitting by Design. It's on Amazon, or you can go to quittingbydesign.com. And you can also find me Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Quitting by Design, all the above. And if you feel as though maybe a little one-on-one coaching would be worthy, one-on-one coaching would be, if you feel, in addition, if you feel one-on-one coaching would be something you'd be interested in, I'm taking on some clients. So go over to Quitting by Design I'm going to start that whole paragraph over. In addition, if you'd like one-on-one coaching, I'm taking on some private clients. So head on over to quittingbydesign.com, click on the coaching button, and then we'll set up a call so we can dive deeply into your unique quit. And if you want to join us over in Quitopia, the Facebook group for the few, the proud, the quitters, where I share more quitting-related content, go on over there. And one last thing, if you found this information to be valuable, I would so appreciate it if you left a 5-star review / rating. It's a great way to help us within the little iTunes algorithm appear when other people are searching for help with their quits. Now, without further ado, Alessandra, thank you for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
Now, we were brought together through LinkedIn because my good friend Josh Trent of Wellness Force had reposted an article you had put on LinkedIn that Alessandra and I were just discussing. We can't find that article and we have no idea what it was because this was months ago at this point, I think sometime over the summer. This is probably going to broadcast in like February, by the way. But I saw that she was a psychologist and she had this great grasp on a lot of the concepts involved in strategic quitting. So I wrote to her and asked her to be on the podcast, and she has come on and she's willing to share her story and a lot of the things she has used in helping her coaching clients and patients. So thank you so much for being with us.
I'm excited to be here. Who is not excited to speak about themselves?
Nobody on this show, let me tell you. I love it. It's a great platform. You're right. I'd be like, would you like to come on and talk about yourself for a while? But isn't that kind of, you're a psychologist, you see patients. Isn't that a lot of what therapy is? Like somebody was asking me yesterday, what's therapy about? And I'm thinking, well, you do get to just kind of talk about yourself for an hour, generally.
Yeah, it's what everybody else's therapy experience is like. But as the therapist sitting, I don't get that.
Exactly.
So yeah, like that is what therapy is about. It's a lot of therapy is about, and this is relevant to kind of what we're talking about today. It's about starting off gaining some kind of insight, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, using that insight to make some strategic change in your life.
Gotcha. Somehow the level just shot right back up right there.
Of course it did. And nothing changed on, well, how about, there we go. I don't know. It's doing its own thing.
Gotcha. The phantom gain.
Is that better? I don't want to
That's better. Yeah.
Scar anybody out there.
No, we'll just cut that out. No worries. Okay. So when you were making your own quit, can you tell us a little bit about the process you went through? Because it sounds like you had kind of a quit and then another quit in the little chat we had ahead of time. Some compound quits.
I had many quits, and I expect to have more before the end of my career. So my story is fairly typical for a professional, I would say. Somewhere in my late teens, I decided I wanted to become a psychologist. I read a lot of Pat Conroy, and his stories always involved really screwed up families. I had watched The Prince of Tides, and Barbara Streisand plays Lowenstein. She's this psychiatrist, has this beautiful office in a high rise. It's totally what I pictured my practice would be like growing up. Plus, like every other therapist out there, I had my own kind of screwed up family issues. So I decided to be a psychologist, went to high school, went to college, went to graduate school, just did everything in one straight, never questioned it. I did have a moment in graduate school, like right before starting, where I was really scared that I might find out I didn't like what I'd set my mind to. And then I was really lucky because I loved it. I loved doing therapy. I loved working with people. I loved the intellectual piece. I was totally convinced that it was complex enough and ever-changing enough that I would love it for the rest of my life. And unfortunately, and well, let me say, it was true. I would say for the first 6+ years of my career, everything I did made me super happy. I walked into the office most days singing, quite literally. There were moments where I would be in session and I would be like this giddy school girl. And then I had child number 1, which throws a whole set of complications into it. And then I had child number 2, and motherhood was great, but it was really demanding. And suddenly I fell out of love with it. And I'm going to stop because quite literally the volume on this thing just goes up. So does it help if I stand further away?
Because right now you're at an 11 again.
Yeah, I know. And I'm watching it. My hand is off everything. And I just see the thing go up, 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 like the volume button go up on its own.
And this is the volume on what are you looking at it on Zoom or?
No. I'm looking at it on my settings, right? Like on the control settings.
Oh,
it is crazy. And it is nothing that I am doing. But I have it there in the foreground now. And I brought it down and I'll see it go back up. And it is really annoying. And I have no idea why it's doing it.
Wow.
So I was wondering if I stand further away, does it help? Or is it still an 11?
It's still pretty loud. It's okay. I can knock it down in yeah.
In editing. I'm sorry, because I actually know what a pain in the nuts that is. I realize that it's a huge, let me see one other thing, but I don't think it's going to see, that's output. That's not going to matter. I figure at least if
that changed something, whatever you
tried to change something, but I bet you this scary thing is going to go up and do its own thing. So if it goes back up, I apologize. I have no idea what's happening, and
that's okay. That's okay.
Apple and figure out what's going on.
We'll deal with it. Yeah, it's all right. So I'm trying to figure out where you left off.
I fell out of love.
Oh yeah. Yes.
So I think I was about 34 or 35 at the time. I think part of the problem is, in hindsight, I now realize I'm an introvert. I'm a social introvert, so I love people. But having children meant that I never had like any downtime anymore. So I'm 34. I'm at the top of my career. I built my own practice. It was full. I was turning people down. Life should have been great, except that there were quite literally days where I have this sliding door to my office where I wanted to open the sliding door and run out. Half of the time I realized upon looking a little bit more closely that I wanted to run out yelling, "Do something about it," to my patients. So I used all the skills I had as a psychologist to try to figure out what the heck was wrong with me and why I wasn't satisfied, especially that there was nothing else I had ever contemplated doing with my life and my career. And out of all that introspection and insight, I realized that I wanted to use the same set of skills, but to work with a different kind of person, right? And I wanted to work with people who were at that stage where they not only could build insight, but were really ready to do something with that insight. So coaching is the natural progression. People will ask me, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? I'll try to do this with my hands. So I say, when people come into therapy, their baseline is here and they're here, and they're trying to get back up to baseline. But coaching, you're at your baseline and you want more, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do that at the end of the therapeutic process with a lot of people. You end up doing some coaching, but I wanted to be able to work more with those kinds of people. And you'll understand this as a physician. I also was really, really tired of the regulations that the Board of Psychology imposed on me. I can't do therapy in another state. I can't do therapy internationally. When I do therapy, if I want to share my ideas, I'm not sure whether or not I can share them, except if I'm doing it as a private citizen, so not using the title. All of those things, the inner adolescent in me bristled at. But coaching, I've coached people in Sweden. I've coached people in England. I've coached people across the US. Coaching was great. The downside with coaching is that in order to do well as an online coach, the way you have to hustle is antithetical to the way I want to work. You have to produce a ton of content that will be read by a few people. A few of those people will decide that they like you enough to follow you. A few of the people who are following you will decide that they value what you have enough to put their money into it. And the hustle of it all killed me. There was one year, and you will probably relate to this, as will a lot of professionals who listen, where I was putting out a blog post, a podcast, a blog of the podcast, a recording, and a newsletter every week.
Yes, I totally relate. Minus the newsletter, but yes, all of those things.
It was killing me. So after that year, I didn't put out very much for a year and then had to do a pivot again, right? So another quit. And the quit, and this has been the case for me. It's interesting because your careers have been very different, right? But my careers have always been within the same general field. I thought of all the people I worked with who happened to be a lot of millennial women who were professionals, who were ridiculously talented and driven and smart, and somehow did not feel valued at work. And a lot of the work that I was doing with these women were helping them find their voice, right? Helping them define what they needed and then find a way to communicate those needs or at least achieve those needs in their environment. And realize that I could provide the same kind of support, but on a one-to-many scale with public speaking. And despite being an introvert, I actually really love public speaking. Put me on a stage in front of 1,000 people sharing a message, as long as I'm interesting those people. And it's fantastic. And I also think that's because of our training, because you and I know how boring most continuing education speakers are, and how often you're a captive audience to somebody who has spent no time creating a message that has value or entertainment value for you.
Right.
Another reason why I love it. So that's what I do now. Like I have a therapy practice. It is thriving. I still work with coaching clients, but what I am trying to build on this side of things, what I'm loving right now, is sharing this message about kind of helping women find their voice, helping men and women communicate better so that we can bridge gaps. And then right now doing this at the corporate levels, because corporations are falling all over themselves trying to figure out how to create more diverse teams, which is fantastic. But you can have a group of women who still don't feel heard, which are the women I was speaking with, and they'll leave. Right?
Yeah.
And then they'll come and find and read your book and do coaching with you to figure out where else they can go. But if they still don't have a voice to speak up and get their needs met in their next career, I can guarantee that within a few years, they're going to want to change careers again.
Yeah, absolutely. There were like 400,000 nuggets of genius in there that I'm going to have to pull out. So I've written down notes. I'm going to hopefully remember everything there. But I could not be doing this interview at a better time, because as somebody just asked me this morning, like, how's everything going? So this, like I said, it's probably going to come out in January, February, but today is October 25th. My book release party is October 26th. And I have been doing nothing but like the hustle that you just talked about. And moreover, in the like, do I need a PR person? Do I need to get somebody to make one of these sales funnels? Like when Alessandra and I were talking before we started recording, she said like the selling yourself through funnels, which if you're not an entrepreneur or trying to sell anything, this funnel business, you may be talking like, what are they talking about? These sales funnels that you're supposed to, okay, have an article that links to a landing page that then gets that person's email, and then you send them an email that sends them to your podcast. And like, it's this dizzying array of hustle essentially that like she said, it will drive you crazy. And then you end up being the person that you're counseling and coaching everybody else not to be. That's exactly like you said. That's exactly it. Like, I mean, if I could, if I could quit the funnel, I mean, I have not even really started the funneling and I want to quit the funnel, you know? And you're absolutely right. There's so much of the hustling. And whew, so you came at a very good time. So we will get to that in a second. But I wanted to back up to the fact that you said you wanted to run out of your practice, and yet you are still practicing.
Yep.
Did you end up being able to change what kind of patients you were seeing, or was it the fact that you now have this other outlet that makes your current practice seem less constricting? Or option 3 is that you still feel totally constricted, and we can be totally open about that too.
Yes and no. Yes. So one of the things I did early on before I ever did like the big insight work was I started changing the kind of patients I saw. And that helped a little bit. And it ties into what I ended up doing as a coach. But even that wasn't enough. Like, it was fixing just part of the problem. It's that thing that you do when you're unhappy with your career, where you tweak one thing and it removes some misery, but it's not addressing the underlying problem. And so you're treating symptoms, right? This is one thing I used to talk about a lot, right? Treating symptoms instead of treating the problem. So as treating the symptoms, I was working with less demanding patients in some ways, people who needed less support. I started working with people who, which is still my specialty, anxiety and stress management, because I love working with those people. I also understand them as a perfectionist, slightly reformed perfectionist, right? So I really get that mentality and the thinking that goes into being caught up into wanting to be the best and never feeling like you can be that person. So that's one thing. It really did help, but it wasn't enough. The other thing was building the coaching business. I hate the hustle. It feels very disingenuous, and it taps into my perfectionist side where I'm never doing well enough. Right? I would love to portray myself as supremely confident, but I'm not. I'm just a human being. And I too am totally, constantly convinced that nobody really cares what I have to say and that I'm not good enough. I work on it. I'm aware of it now.
Yes.
I don't give in to it, right? At least, or I don't believe it. I just worry about it. So, but I do love the business side of things, which I didn't expect, right? They don't teach you that in professional school. They don't teach you that. My husband's an anesthesiologist. I know they don't teach you that in med school. And they sure as hell don't teach you that in clinical psychology school. So I loved doing the business part. I loved defining my brand. That was so fun, figuring out what I wanted to do. I spent too many hours on my website. That was exciting too. There's the creative outlet. I discovered that I loved writing. Right? I didn't realize how much I loved writing, but shifting the career allowed me to fall in love with, to do that. And yet I still, like 5 years after that, found myself wanting to repivot. Right? So it's not because I hate or I'm completely boxed into what I do, but if you told me all I was going to do for the rest of my life, my professional life, is therapy, yeah, I'd still want to run out of the room screaming.
Gotcha.
It's great. And maybe it's not a popular thing to say because you're supposed to just love everything you do. And I don't want any of my patients who might listen to this to think that I don't really love the moments I'm in the room with them. Most of them read my blog, so they've heard this or read it before anyhow. But I want more. I want different. And the speaking right now it's very different. Working with the corporate world is very different, but it's exciting. And I get to share a message that's near and dear to me, but also ties into everything else I do. But I totally expect that in 5 to 10 years, I'm going to want to pivot again.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that you've set yourself up for that, because I think, like you said initially, when you go from age 19 thinking this is what I want to do, and you get all the way to 34, and then you feel that like you said, you fell out of love with it, that could come as kind of a shock. But now you've realized, oh no, this is what I want to do right now, but in 5 years may not be, especially because a lot of us, I was going to ask, like, had you done any shadowing of therapists? I think that might be even a hard thing to shadow, right?
No.
Like you can't sit in with patients. And that's a lot of what I think goes on in at least the US. I don't know how it is in other countries, but there's so few opportunities to truly get a feeling for what a career is going to be like until you've already spent so much time and money getting to that career and you're in it. And then you're like, oh, if I would have known it was X, Y, and Z, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't have that opportunity. So that's what I think people need to cut themselves some slack. I mean, you cut yourself slack all the time, guys. Like no matter what the thing is, like you said, you're a therapist and you have to cut yourself some slack for knowing, that I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. Story still exists, right? But cut yourself some slack if you picked one career and you don't love it, because there weren't a whole lot of chances for you to test that out. Even an internship does not give you the exact feeling of what it will be like to be in it.
If you were to meet somebody and within a month decide to marry them, most of the people in your life would say you're crazy. Now, it's not that there aren't great love stories that happen like that and where people grow old and, those are fantastic, but they would think it's crazy. It is crazy to me in hindsight that we assume that as 20-year-olds, we have the insight and the knowledge to determine what we are supposed to be doing at this point until we're in our 70s.
Yeah.
And that we would even start to believe, and this is why I think people really need to give themselves a break, that you're going to be the same person and want the same things in your 40s that you wanted in your 20s or your 50s that you wanted in your 30s. Like, development doesn't stop at 18. So why do we believe we would still be interested and driven and passionate about the same things at 50 that we were at like 29?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a huge part of this. Like you said, there were a number of years where it was great for you. You were giddy doing it. And then priorities shift in your life. And what I'm guessing may be part of it is like you have less time to yourself. So you want to make sure all the time that you are doing a thing that's away from your kids, you're thoroughly enjoying it. Like suddenly the time has more of a premium put on it. And you're like, no, I don't want to be sitting here with patients that aren't willing to do the work and aren't willing to help me in their therapeutic journey. And you just want to focus on the ones that are. And I totally understand that. And that's another reason people should cut themselves slack, is because, now you're 45 and okay, you don't love the
41.
thing you picked when you were not you. No.
Okay.
Sorry. No, you're 41?
I'm like, don't age me.
No. You're 41?
Yeah.
Love that we just yelled that out on a podcast. Love you. I'm also 41. This was a hypothetical guy who's 45 that I'm talking to. But, somebody who's like, okay, I've worked at this same, finance job since I was 25, right out of college. That was one person who, like you said, in our early 20s, we don't have a whole ton of insight into who we are. We're just like walking on our own 2 feet out from underneath our parents for the first time. And we're way more in our ego at that point, and a whole lot less in tune with our intuition and what, our inner soul really wants. We're like, okay, we got to get the car and the house and all these things. And then by the time you're 45, you're like, okay, I had all those things and I'm not super happy to get up every morning. So that's because you change, your priorities change. And so when you're coaching people through this, what are some of the major hurdles you see?
I would say the first one is not realizing what we just talked about. Because when people think that falling out of love with what they're doing is a sign that their life is screwed, right? That when you dismiss it simply as being a midlife crisis, right? Then you start feeling really, really anxious. But if you look at it and you understand that this is just normal development, of course, right? Of course, periodically, like your interests are going to change, your focus is going to change. Then you can look at this disenchantment with less anxiety. And when we're really anxious, like our cognitive faculties diminish, right? It's harder to reason. So when we calm down, we can start reasoning. So that was the first thing. Just like give yourself a break. Realize that it's totally normal. The second thing is this idea of treat the problem, not the symptoms, right? So a lot of times, again, people get unhappy at work, and so they decide that they're going to take more trips. They're going to reduce the number of hours they work. They are going to try to change one thing about about how they do their job. But if you don't stop and take the time to understand who you are in that moment, so what has changed about you, and to redefine what your needs are, then those actions might make you feel better for a little while, but not great. So going back to the marriage analogy, it's a little bit like having an affair. When you have an affair, most people who have affairs aren't awful, awful people. There's just a disconnect between them and their spouse, and they're trying to get needs met with somebody else that they're not getting met with their spouse. Nothing's getting better in the marriage. They're just slightly more satisfied for a certain period of time, right? So it's the same idea. So the other thing would be what I did with a lot of my clients is we spent a lot of time trying to redefine what they needed. And we did an exercise, which honestly is fairly, I didn't pioneer this. It's fairly typical for coaching, right? I would take this scenario. I'd say, listen, imagine that you're 80 years old. Some young person comes towards you and says, did you live well? And they're like, and your answer is, yeah. And with this half-cocked smile, like, yeah, all in all, I'm satisfied. I'm really satisfied with the way I've lived my life. Now, all in all assumes you've screwed up, you've made mistakes, you've failed, you've made bad choices, and there were some good choices. And so then I would break it down with people and say, okay, write a narrative for me. If that's true professionally, what makes you say that in your love life? And we'd break it down. So even though a lot of times I was working with people on changing their professional lives, I would make them do that same exercise with all areas of lives. And we'd say everything from the time you were born to the time you're writing this is set in stone. We're not changing your history. Everything from today up until that theoretical 80 years old, you get to be as creative as you want. It has to be grounded in reality. You can't say that you become a concert pianist if you've never played the piano, right? Yeah. But you could say, if you hate your job, I quit my job and I went and I traveled the world for a year because you have the ... to do that, and I ... And we don't use that narrative to figure out what the person's next step is. I use it to break what I call this adult mindset. Do you ever find this working with people, right? They want to change careers and you ask them what they love, what they're interested in, and they start throwing out ideas and then they self-censor because they're like, well, that's not possible. That's not easy. That's not realistic. And it might be true, but then they never get to this place where they can open up their mind and really start thinking about who they are or what they want. So that was the whole point of that. It was like to break people out of that adult mindset. And then we get a bunch of themes and we compare those themes to their lives. And the themes, as far as I'm concerned, most of them are needs. And we might say, oh, you talk about opening up your own business. What is it about opening up your own business that seems so satisfying? And they're going to start articulating stuff. And as you go through this process, you start to understand what makes you tick. And not just, I want to stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people and just galvanize them. But what is it about that? Oh, I'm driven to connect with people. Right. So whatever I do professionally, it can't be alone in an office somewhere. I like the freedom and the flexibility. Yeah, but not any kind of freedom or flexibility. I don't just want to be able to work remotely every once in a while. Right. I like the idea of making a real impact with people. Sure. But there's a very specific kind of impact I want to make. I could be working with people just on stress management and it wouldn't satisfy me. So it's getting clearer and clearer about that picture. So I guess to recap, because I know I'm verbose.
But it's all good. It's all good stuff.
It's that idea of realizing that it's normal to fall out of love with your career and that it will probably happen more than once, given that we're working far longer. And second of all, to think about addressing that problem, not by just trying to make yourself feel better in the moment, but really working with somebody. If you can do it alone, that's great. But if not, find someone to work with, whether it's a coach or a friend, who can help you identify what your needs are today, not what things you want, right? But what really drives you. And then you can look at the reality of your world. If you have 2 children and a mortgage, and you have to caretake for an elderly parent, well, you might have a need to travel that's going to be met a certain way than if you're a 22-year-old, well, let's say 25-year-old with a trust fund who has a lot of freedom. and can just say, you know what? Yes, I can't do this way. I want to go travel for a year. But that need can still be met.
Yes. Oh my God, this was just like a commercial for strategic quitting. I love so much of that. Treating the problem, not the symptoms. That is a huge part. That's why I talk about quitting, because that's like the ultimate treatment of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Quitting the source of what's causing it. Like you said, okay, my job is so stressful that I need to take all these vacations. No, the vacation is treating the symptom of the stress. Quit the job. Like, you don't want to have to just live looking for your next vacation, or like you said with your marriage, hoping another affair comes around that will fulfill your needs. I mean, if the marriage isn't fulfilling your needs and you've already tried the couples therapy and the counseling and you've decided this is not going to happen, then quit the marriage and stop trying to treat the symptoms by finding these other ways that are actually just going to be harmful to the spouse that you currently have. So many things in there. Did you live well? And looking back on your life, such a good idea. Some people have you write your eulogy. I like yours. You're still alive in your scenario, but look back and see what themes are there, and then see what's not there. That was huge for me once, is writing out my ideal day. And this is just in the present, but obviously it would work if you said, okay, what would your ideal day, what if you had an ideal day and you did it every day for the rest of your life, what would you look back on at age 80 and say, I did well, right? So I wrote it down physically with the whole pen and paper thing, and the stuff that came out led me to realize, oh, I definitely want this kind of partner, and I definitely want this kind of job. And at the time, I was not in that kind of job, yet I was trying to go down avenues related to that kind of job that would have gotten me to other jobs that were not the job I wrote down. And I was like, wow, this is, you need to sometimes get that pen to paper to realize what your needs truly are, what your subconscious is wanting for you, because society tells you, like you were talking about with the hustle and the funnels and all these things that you should want. And if that's not your, like you said, your true need, your true desire, that's probably not the avenue you should go down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so many good things. Okay, I'm gonna go back over my notes to make sure. Oh, then the last thing is how you said having people realize that it's normal to want to change. So much of what I do in this podcast is just making other people feel like they are not wrong in wanting to quit. You didn't make a mistake. I think when I made my first quit, when I did multimedia design, and then I changed and I went to medical school, and I had this conversation with my father, and he had, thank you very much to him, paid for my undergraduate, but he wasn't going to pay for grad school or medical school. And he said, if you're going to change careers, make sure you don't make, it's kind of like saying, make sure you don't make another mistake, as if my whole entire first career was a mistake. And luckily at the time I was 22, didn't put a lot of whatever on it, but people need to know that that's not a mistake. That was a choice you made that was, like you talked about, right for you at that time.
Yeah.
And it may not be right now for you or at this time. It's okay. It's not a mistake. The universe has a plan. It's all parts of learning. Like, I would not take back any parts of my very strange career path that I no longer do anymore, but they all led me to this place. So please do not think you have made a mistake because you were here listening to Quit Happens, wanting to quit your job or your relationship. If you're in a marriage that you want to quit, you didn't pick the wrong person. You picked the right person for you right then. And then either you changed or they changed, or maybe circumstances changed. Do not waste any energy that you could be using to move you forward on regrets and beating yourself up for the past.
I would add one last thing that I talk about a lot: slow down. Right? So people's tendency when they get anxious, when they get stressed out, is to feel really restless. And in that trying to treat the symptom thing, they try to do more, right? If my life feels really boring at work, maybe I try to do more. I try to distract myself. And there's no space to figure out what's right for you if you don't slow down. It's very hard to understand what the actual problem is if you're just reacting to the symptoms. So one thing I use personally all the time, but also teach my patients, my clients, anybody who's willing to listen, is this thing I call the art of nothing, but really it's a catchy way of saying, learn to sit down and daydream again, to just stare into space. And when people are like, I don't have time to do this, I remind them that they can leave their phones at their desks when they go to the bathroom. That's a good start, right? Like, nobody needs to be entertained on the throne. But that's one place where they can slow down. When you're heating up your food, like, don't go wash more dishes. Don't check Instagram. Don't take moments to slow down. And the more you do it in the beginning, it tends to be really difficult, especially for people who are anxious or unhappy. And yet you pass this point where suddenly it feels really good. And when you slow down, you can finally start listening to yourself and understand what you need. So you're not reacting anymore. You're taking action.
Oh, I'm going to let that sink in, guys. I can't believe that now I have to wait till January, February to release this. This is so good. My friend, slowing down, subtracting, you called it slow down. You said people keep adding. I often refer to the fact that quitting is important because often you need to subtract something from your life and not add more. If you're stressed out because you already have too many things, adding a new type of self-care can be very stressful. You know, I've had this situation where I'll call the massage therapist I have and I set it up, and then 2 days later, the podcast scheduling ran over and I'm stressing myself out to make it to the massage time. You know, in fact, I didn't need to add more massage, more self-care. I needed to not record so many podcasts that week. And a lot of times that's where I think we get confused. Let's do more. And you had made this thing that only people on YouTube can see, but the levels, and you were talking about wanting to have patients that start at kind of the baseline and then they're taken upward. And that's what I say about self-care, is that self-care is generally designed, for example, meditation, it's supposed to take us from baseline, normal individuals, to this more enlightened space. But most of us use it for what you described as taking you from the basement back to baseline, because we're so stressed out that we use meditation or journaling or all these self-care massage type things, treating the symptoms. They treat the symptoms just so we can get back to baseline instead of doing their actual job, which is to bring us from baseline to this. You know, a massage should make you not unstress the muscles that you cramped up all week. It should actually release muscles that were just at baseline. And then you're a more flexible person, a more supple leopard, as they say, and you can go on into the future being even healthier. And not so that self-care is not just constantly undoing the symptoms of this stressful disease that you have at the core. My friend, where can people find you? Because this is a bunch of genius and I want them to be able to follow along.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will leave feeling so much better from that. The website is lifeinfocussd.com because I'm located in San Diego. And I am on Instagram under Dr. Alessandra Wall. The doctor is just Dr. Facebook is the same thing. And Twitter, that Alessandra is too long of a name for Twitter. So I had to shorten that to Dr. Wall Says on Twitter. But probably the ones where I'm really active right now are Instagram, Medium. I'm on Medium as well. I like publishing things there. And the website always has information.
Very cool. Alessandra and I just met right now, and I think we should be friends forever.
I like this. And you said you were in San Diego too?
I am. Who knew?
Oh, we just go grab coffee or wine or something.
I like her. This has been great. Thank you so much for joining us, Alessandra.
It has been awesome. Truly. Thank you.
Absolutely. And for everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.